As you enable DRS in your cluster, there are a few decisions that you need to make. And these decisions start with the automation level and the migration threshold. The automation level has to do with whether or not DRS is going to be making vMotion migrations automatically, or simply presenting you, the vSphere administrator, with those recommendations, allowing you to choose whether or not you want to do it. There are actually 3 levels here, and they have to do with those 2 main features of a DRS cluster. That's initial placement of virtual machines as they are powered on, and then the later migration of the VMs from host to host as the load changes in the environment. So the first setting that we have here is manual mode. And what manual mode simply does is allow you, the vSphere administrator, or I should say require you, the vSphere administrator, to OK any recommendations that DRS makes. It has to do with the initial placement. It says to you, when you hit the power on button, it will present you with an option. Hey, vSphere DRS recommends that you place virtual machine 1 on host 4. Would you like to do that? Or would you like to do something else? You click OK or choose a different host. Okay? It also then will periodically, every 60 seconds, look for better places for your virtual machines. And if it finds a better place, it will simply report that to you as a recommendation in the vSphere client, and then waits for you to choose whether or not to accept that recommendation. That's manual mode. In partially automated mode, vSphere DRS does the initial placement for you. You power on a VM, DRS chooses the host and powers it on. But in order to do migrations every 60 seconds, DRS will look for new and better places for your virtual machines and make that migration if it finds a better place for your virtual machine. Finally, in fully automated mode, it does both of those things together. You, as the vSphere administrator, are completely hands-off. DRS does its thing. Okay? So that's the automation level. Now, as vSphere every 60 seconds, or DRS every 60 seconds, is looking for better places to run your virtual machines, what are the factors that DRS is going to use? Is it simply going to say, you know what, I can't power a virtual machine on this host, or maybe I've created a rule. We call these affinity rules. We're going to be talking about these affinity rules next, that says, I absolutely must place this virtual machine on this particular host or this particular subset of the hosts in the cluster, or I'm not allowed to place the virtual machine on this subset of hosts in a cluster, and all of a sudden a host goes down and DRS has to do it, and then the host comes back. Oh, well, a conservative migration level would absolutely go back to following those affinity rules and moving the VMs, right? So a conservative migration threshold will only absolutely move VMs if it's absolutely required by a rule, all the way to an aggressive migration threshold that says, hey, I know I can achieve a better score for this particular VM, and even though this VM is not actually under contention, I'll move the VM simply to achieve a better score. So we have this migration threshold that we have set. We consider this level 1 to level 5, level 1 being the most conservative, level 5 being the most aggressive. And it starts right in the middle at a level 3, moving virtual machines around the cluster simply to avoid contention and to follow the rules that we as vSphere administrators set for those virtual machines. We'll talk more about those rules later on in this particular lesson. Now, there's this really cool setting called predictive DRS. And the story goes something like this. All right, I am under contention in the environment because it's the 3rd Friday of the month. And the 3rd Friday of every month, we go under contention, right? Why? Because, I don't know, there's some sort of accounting application and it's doing all its stuff and it's consuming lots and lots of CPU and memory where the rest of the month it doesn't, right? So on a regular basis, these applications get fired up. All of a sudden there's contention. Now that there's contention, DRS kicks in and it starts migrating virtual machines around. All well and good. Except the fact that vMotion is occurring during a time of contention, at least very briefly, increases that contention because of the cost of the vMotion. So wouldn't it be cool if I could do those migrations ahead of time in order to avoid the contention in the first place? Could I be predictive? Could I be a fortune teller about this? Can I predict the future? Well, right, that sounds a little bit far-fetched, right? Not so much. We have this really cool product in the software-defined data center portfolio called vRealize Operations Manager. vRealize Operations Manager tracks performance over time and looks for trends. A vRealize Operations Manager system runs in a virtual appliance and connects to vCenter, and vCenter constantly feeds it performance information. Now, vRealize Operations Manager sees, gee, the last 4 months you've had a spike in load, and it's engaged vMotions for a particular set of VMs on the 3rd Friday of the month, right? Then maybe in the 5th month, you're going to experience that as well. Utilizing vRealize Operations Manager and combining that or integrating that with DRS allows you to enable predictive DRS, where those migrations will take place ahead of time. It does it about an hour ahead of time in advance of predicted contention. Very, very cool stuff. Enabling predictive DRS is available when you have integrated vRealize Operations Manager with vCenter Server. Now, increasing the cost of vMotion is a setting on the host level that allows you to place your VM swap files on a local a local SSD. Okay? You do this by clicking on a particular host, going to the Configure tab, and then under General, there's a setting that says, where do you want the swap file for VMs that are running on this host? Do you want it with the rest of the virtual machines, or do you want it in a data store for the host? Okay, local to the host. You get to choose that on your cluster. Okay, you get to choose that on each of your ESXi hosts. And by default, the swap file is stored with the rest of the virtual machine files. So if you never change this, this is not something that you have to worry about. But one of the settings of a DRS cluster says, we don't like this idea that the swap file is stored on non-shared storage, because when we do a vMotion of the VM, we have to take that swap file and place it somewhere local to the destination host. So the setting says, do you want to actually store it in the virtual machine directory, which is where it should be in the first place? Or do you want to fall back to the settings that you've configured on the host? Okay, we recommend storing it on the virtual machine directory. Okay, click OK, and you're all set. Now, when we come back in part number 3, we're going to have a look at virtual machine affinity. And that looks at the idea here that placement because of CPU and memory loads are not the end-all be-all in my decision-making process about where virtual machines belong with respect to hosts as well as other virtual machines. So think about that idea, and we'll come right back and discuss.